Okay, so we're going to jump back into the narrative of Genesis in Genesis 18 and 19. We've been walking through the life of Abraham, and we kind of came to this point where uh, he's had the covenant made. He's had this reiterated multiple times. He now has done the sign of circumcision for his whole household. And so, as we're coming straight out of that narrative, the next narrative, there's not going to be a large gap into the next narrative. It's going to start right away. It's within the next few days or months leading up after that covenant. Like we saw earlier, sometimes there's gaps of 10 years or things happening. So, Abraham is 99. He just had his entire household circumcised. Ishmael's 13. There's this child of promise that's still supposed to be coming. Last we'd read Abraham had laughed and God about the promised child. And because it's such an incredible miracle, Sarah was barren all of her childbearing years, and now she's beyond childbearing years. So the idea of having a child at this point seems kind of ridiculous to him. Like it's not natural. It's not something that could happen. Um, and so here we just see we're going to pick up kind of right where the last bit left off. He's serious about this covenant, and again, he's had everyone in his household circumcised. So that shows a real level of seriousness. So in Genesis 18, we're going to start reading a few of the verses and then get into this entire thing. And we're going to walk through the narrative of Sodom being destroyed and how Abraham's faithfulness and interaction with God really changes things for Lot yet again, right? So Lot's been in trouble before. He was taken off in an international war carried off by the Babylonian and Assyrian kings. He and his whole family. Abraham had to step in and rescue him. And again, we're going to see Abraham being this very blessed man again with God and being able to just pray and intercede on someone's behalf kind of idea. And not exactly pray, but discuss and dialogue on someone else's behalf with God. So in verse 1 in Genesis 18 is where we're going to start. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth tree of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, there were 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. So he lifts up his eyes, and behold, there's 3 men that were standing nearby. And so he recognizes this as very special. And so as we're going to find out, who he's seeing is actually the Lord and 2 angels. And I'm going to make that clear up front. Like that was one of the main points in this whole thing, is trying to describe who he's interacting with. It's regularly recognized that this is a theophany, right? This is not Jesus will come later in the incarnation and be fully human and walk life out. This is a theophany before that happened. At this time, God's coming sometimes as a man, sometimes as a fire or a pillar of smoke or a cloud, like the Spirit of God comes at times. So God is interacting even in the physical world, but it's different. This is not a man that's been born and that's coming, right? This is not Jesus in that sense, but it is probably the second person of the Trinity. That's how most theologians kind of describe the theophanies. Usually described as the angel of the Lord. So here, Abraham immediately recognizes the Lord appeared to him is the way it states it. He recognizes and he runs to meet him and bows down. So you get this sense that there's going to be, the bowing is in respect, but we're also going to see here there's some parts of this that are like worship. He's going to kill a calf that's kind of more reminiscent of like offerings and sacrifices, but he's going to throw this big banquet for him. So Abraham recognizes immediately. We're going to see later in the story Lot doesn't recognize the men that came to him necessarily. So again, this is that when he bows down before the Lord, he's not corrected. And we'll see in other places that you're not allowed to worship before angels. So that's how we know that this isn't just an angel, because there's quite a few things in this story that are pointing to more than just an angel here. The 2 angels with him are obviously messenger angels, and he's not going to be worshiping them in any way. We see the warning against worshiping angels actually in Revelation and in the book of Daniel. There's sometimes a physical response when an angel shows up. People fall down. It kind of makes sense, right? Anytime you interact with the Spirit of God or an angel, there's always a chance that our frail human bodies give out. We see this even in some of the unruly kings. I believe it was one of the kings of Babylon. His loins loosen, which means he wet himself or more. But because the hand of God was writing on the wall at that point. So anytime there's an interaction with the spiritual world and God, there is a chance that our physical bodies will react. And so sometimes we see people falling on their faces. In this case, Abraham makes a conscious choice to bow. But again, this happens. But we see in Daniel that there's two verses, and it says, one in Daniel 8:18 says, while he was speaking to me, and this is an angel speaking to Daniel, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, and he touched me and raised me to my feet. So we'll see this quite a few times. Angels tend to pick people up and say, hey, I want to make sure that you're not worshiping me. Like, let's make sure. And then in Daniel 10, 9 and 10, it says, then I heard him speaking, the angel, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my feet and my knees. So in many cases, the angels will pick people up, or they'll absolutely in Revelation forbid John from worshiping them. They will make it clear, I am not Jesus. Do not worship me. And that's important. We're never to worship angels. And they may come and interact with people, but this is different. This is the Lord, or the angel of the Lord. And so again, this is where we see Abraham. He's having this encounter. We've already seen this happen with Hagar. She's already met the Lord, and she said, I've seen his back, meaning I didn't see his face, because there is this idea that if you see the face of God, you'll die. We know that Jesus walked on earth, and plenty of people saw Jesus's face and they didn't die. But they're talking about the face of God, and Hagar even says it's more like I saw the back of God in this encounter. And so we get the sense that Abraham is able to interact with the Lord, as though, like I said, they're going to use the words here back and forth between Lord and angels and men, right? And behold, 3 men were standing by him. Okay, so these men are there. And so again, they're in some sort of physical form that's interacting, and he's able to converse and have this. And they're going to go ahead and host them a meal, which again, we don't normally think of angels or the Lord coming to eat a meal. So in verse 3, it says, and said, my Lord, I have now found favor in your sight. Do not pass by on your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. So Abraham is in covenant with God, immediately recognizes him, wants to wash his feet. I mean, some of this is normal hospitality in the Middle East. They would have washed each other's feet. They would have given people food, water, those kinds of things. It's right. This is a more unhospitable area. Anybody who's traveling might be given some sort of visitor's welcome. And you can see that Abraham is as a good hospitality person, saying, oh, just let me do a little bit. Let me give you a morsel of bread. Let me give you a little bit of water. And then you hear what happens. He's going to go in his tent now, and you're going to hear. And they said, do as you've said. So Abram hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal. That's a little bit more than a little bit of bread. Knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd to a tender and a good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. And so he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree as they ate. So this is not just a little bit of bread and water, like he said. He actually has a calf killed, just showing the level of extravagance, butter, milk, all of this larger meal. So he tells them, oh, I'm just going to get you a little bread. And he goes in and has them make fresh bread, kill a cow, cook the cow. So this is taking time, right? So they're spending time together. Again, this is a full meal that they're going to have in honor and respect, and much more of what, I'm almost thinking, we think of banquets compared to just like a quick snack, right? Like there is a difference in what's going on here. And then they said to him, so they're going to continue this conversation. Where is Sarah, your wife? So he said, here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. So again, we've already heard this. We heard this in the last interaction during the covenant. It was very clear. Sarah was going to have a child. She was going to name it Isaac. It was going to be a boy. There was going to be a kingly line come from her, not from any other woman in Abraham's life. And it wasn't going to be his next wife or any other games. It was going to be from Sarah. He laughed, and God had corrected him. And now we're seeing And he said this child, the other thing he knows now is the timeline. That child was to be born within a year. So he's going to get circumcised, and then within a year, he's going to have a child. So that means he has about 3 months to conceive this child. And so there's just this 3-month window that this could be happening right after the circumcision event. So so according to this time, like next year at this time, he's going to come visit again, and there's going to be a child. So Abraham had already been promised this, right? We have to think Sarah probably knows. She may not know that Abraham laughed, but you got to think she might have known that Abraham had laughed and God had corrected him and said, no, it's really going to be her. Up to this point, like I said, they probably were thinking it was Ishmael because that's what Abraham had said. Oh, that Ishmael might live and be the one that's blessed. And so again, we know this is an impossible situation. They've made that clear. Like, look, God, we've tried. We've tried for 24 years at this point. And it didn't happen. And now it's just, we've shut that door, we've moved on. And God has now told them this is the second time. Now in verse 11, it says, now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in years. So again, the author is agreeing. They are too old to have children on their own. And Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also. So she's saying this inside. She's not, Abraham just laughs out loud. It sounds like she's laughing internally and within herself saying. So she's having these thoughts and God's perceiving her thoughts here. So she doesn't believe. She doesn't seem to have caught on, either wasn't told or hasn't really grasped what Abraham told her. You're going to be the mother of many kings and you're going to have this child. Maybe she was tired of hearing it. I mean, you've got to think that's part of the reason she put Hagar up to have this child. It was becoming a thing. And now Hagar has made fun of her. Like there has been a lot going on in her life over the last 24 years. She's been the wife that can't do what wives do at that time period, and that was to have children. And so again, Abraham and Sarah, they should have been living in faith at this point. They just had that covenant. It hadn't even been, like I said, it couldn't even been more than 3 months. Like it seems like it was right away. And she should have been in some sort of belief at this point. Abraham had believed enough to get the house circumcised, so Sarah probably should be also believing. And then it is important to know, this child comes after the circumcision. It is after the covenant's already made, the child's going to come. And so Abraham is already living in covenant with God. Those things have really already been put in place. And then this child is going to be a child of that covenant and promise. And so then we go into verse 13 and it says, and the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I'm old? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. So again, he's saying next year, I'm going to show up, right? We got that language really clear in the passage before in the covenant. 1 year. In 1 year, I'm going to show up. So they have about 1 year now to have this child come about. So it's about 3 months to conceive, somewhere in the next 3 months, and then the child comes. So they should be living in faith. And so this whole interaction is just going to end in verse 15. It says, but Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So he's called her out on what's going on. He's reaffirming to her, no, really, this is going to happen. Let me say it again. In a year, you're going to have this son. And she's now denying that she laughed. She's scared. So we're not quite sure exactly what she's scared of, but she is afraid of the Lord, as she should be. And so there is a reverence here. This whole interaction just ends. There's no specific consequences. He doesn't take away his promise of the child. The child's still going to come, whether Sarah was living in faith or not. That's probably why he is there, to reiterate this, like, you're going to have a child. And she's probably getting the message that he is serious about giving this child, thankfully. So again, if she's afraid, to kind of fess up that she was laughing in her heart and in disbelief. So again, we're not seeing necessarily the same things we see in some of the other, sin stories and things where God comes, asks a question, they lie, or am I my brother's keeper, or whatever it is, to pass blame or guilt. Here, she doesn't own up to it, but there's no consequence after it. And so again, God's working with them. Also, the promise is just as much hers as it is Abraham's. He doesn't move it to a different wife. He doesn't do any of that. So we just see this as being a very gracious and interactive thing. She's getting to talk to God, and And so from here, that's just how the entire discussion ends. We'll find out a year later how this picks up. Obviously, she's going to find out in the next couple of months how this picks up, right? And so this is not a long time scale after all these years of waiting and being told that they're going to have this child, and having probably for 13 years just thinking it wasn't going to happen. It was Ishmael, and now having this come back. So again, God is constantly working with their faith, working with where they're at, and just dealing with these different parts of their life. So now we're going to move into a different part of the narrative. This is going to be just the part where Abraham and God start interacting. So it says in verse 16, then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. We'll find out as this narrative goes on, only 2 of the men leave, and they're both angels. So 2 angels leave, but the Lord stays behind. And sometimes we read this account and we just have this idea, oh, God spoke and Abraham spoke, and we get the idea maybe he's praying. Like I've heard that taught sometimes, like Abraham prays to God and he intercedes for the city, and they're having this dialogue like in a prayer conversation. It's not. He's standing there. The Lord is in theophany at this point with Abraham, and they're having a conversation. And it's really interesting how this is going to happen. And so Sodom now becomes the focus. They're just passing through Abraham, and you get the feeling they're passing through, number one, they needed to address Sarah, and that this really was going to happen because there's obviously still some unbelief going on with this promise. And 2, they're going to then go on to say, Sodom's and your nephew, it's kind of giving Abraham the ability to intercede here, plead for the life of his nephew. And so that's how the focus of this conversation is now going to shift. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing, since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, and they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So this is a long way of saying, God is kind of saying out loud, which is interesting, I'm in covenant now with Abraham. You know what? I'm going to share with him some things. I'm going to start to bring him into my ways more deeply, explain, that sometimes we talk about the value system behind the action, right? That's kind of what's going to happen, because Abraham's going to be the head over a lot of nations, and he's going to be raising up these children, and he's going to be explaining how to interact with God and who God is, right? We get this picture that Lot really just doesn't get it. And so Abraham needs to leave something different behind in his children. And God appeals to that. He's like, we need to let Abraham in on this, because there's going to be mighty nations that come from him. He's supposed to be a blessing to the world. That means he needs to understand the ways of God a bit more. And if we read some other books of the Bible, I'll keep bringing up Job kind of as contrast. Job and his friends really don't know the ways of God. They kind of have this conversation between the 4 of them to start with. And it kind of seems like they don't really get it. They think if you sin and then God just punishes you, and if you're sick, all sickness is caused because of your own personal sin. And God is kind of like tearing this apart in Abraham. Like, I'm going to show you what righteousness and justice look like. I'm going to show you kind of when judgment comes and when it doesn't. And so some of the things that Job didn't really understand, and Job ends up just filling in the wrong answer, which is, I'm so righteous, and God obviously isn't for making me sick and taking all my stuff away. But Abraham isn't going to accuse God in this. And some people call it he's haggling. Again, he's more in the questioning Abraham gives. You see a very humble posture. He keeps saying, oh, my Lord, if only I could ask one more question. And he's going to do this as he dialogues. And I think it's important to notice the heart posture. Job eventually gets called to the rug before God. He gets called down on by God to answer, and God basically just kind of tears down everything he's been saying about God. He says, I'm so much bigger than you and greater, and has to put him in his place. We don't see that with Abraham. Abraham kind of understands his place. He's come as a servant. He understands he doesn't know things. And the questions aren't because he thinks he knows better than God. It's because he doesn't know. And so again, and he needs to know, right? So the Lord is saying, I need to instruct Abraham. And the 2 words that really stand out in verse 19 are righteousness and justice. We see these come up regularly in the New Testament. The word righteousness is the word justification. It's how we're righteous before God. It's not, in the Old Testament particularly, we see righteousness in a slightly different way than maybe the Protestants have then defined it. But in the Old Testament, righteousness is really set up as Noah was righteous, Abraham was righteous. So we get this sense that they're doing rightly to God. So they're listening to what he's told them to do, and they're treating others correctly. It doesn't have just a sense of, I was sinning so much and then Jesus came and saved me, which is fine. And that's another type of justification and righteousness we do talk about. But this is doing rightly, a doing justice and doing merciful things for people and towards God. So we'll see people that are outside, right? Cain murders his brother. That's not following God's ways. That's also not treating others correctly. So he was not righteous. He was not just, and he wasn't doing things that were right. And so those are kind of the definitions we need to have of righteousness. It's doing right things before God and people. And justice is a major theme of the Old Testament. We'll see through a lot of the prophets, the people don't just get in trouble for being idolatrous. They get in trouble because they're not treating the poor and the widow with justice and with mercy. So when cases are being tried, you could be bribed, or that would not be justice, right? That's giving into a lot of things that aren't right and just. So Abraham here is going to get a little bit of a lesson on how God treats the wicked and the righteous. And he needs that because he's going to be the one to explain this to a lot of other people. And it's going to kind of live on through this line that he's supposed to be raising up. So again, we have this idea that God is in covenant with Abraham, and so they can have this conversation. And so again, we're going to have to see how is God has to deal with unrighteousness, because as righteousness spreads, and we see this in our own generational patterns and things, abused people tend to become abusers if they don't do something to interject. Some sort of other person comes in with something that's better or right? You might get taken out of that situation or learn a different way or go to counseling or join a support group or something that changes your mind on the way you were taught. And you have to overcome all those patterns that you learned, right? Of anger, of reaction, of all the hurt you suffered, and not passing that on. And that's really what righteousness and wickedness start to have. We started to see that in the early decline in Genesis, that as wickedness comes, it increases as time goes on. Abused people that don't get healed, that don't have those Jesus moments, right? How much worse it continues. Like there's many times where we don't know how bad it could actually be in our own actions and lives, because Jesus has come in and he started healing those things when we got saved. We may not be perfect or anything, but things have really already started to change in our lives, and we start to deal with those generational patterns and the sins that we've learned as abusers, and right, all these things that we do to each other to sin against each other. And so I don't want to be too heavy. We live in a toxic world, and I like the word toxic better than abuse, because a lot of times it's just toxicity that we just kind of absorb it, and then we start living from it. Our thoughts start to be negative towards ourselves and others, and that's not going to produce righteousness in our lives. That's not going to produce right actions towards others or towards God and their thoughts. So again, this is something that's being handled in this, is that there's something really wrong going on in the city. And that doesn't just it's not just because of the sin of a few people, it's actually affecting other people as well. If you're in a wicked city, sometimes you're not doing wrong, which we'll find out from Lot's daughters. They weren't out being promiscuous, but they were in this city that was dealing with some really heavy topics. And they were going to be basically abused in the story if the angels hadn't intervened. So again, let's just kind of get into the story. And the Lord said in verse 20, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I will know. So basically, Sodom's going to get weighed. It's going to get weighed. Is it really as unjust as has been coming before the Lord? So the Lord is watching what's going on earth. He's not just watching the promised line. He's saying, I'm watching everybody here. It never says who's crying out about Sodom and the problems in Sodom. We don't know. It could be angelic reports of the sin. So they could be crying out to God, the sin has gone on so long. We see this later, that the martyrs are the ones in Revelation crying out to God. We've been martyred for you, right? It could be those being abused are crying out to God. God, save me from this abuse, or little children. You don't know. Like it could be, and it could be just God is saying, like, the wickedness is so bad, those being abused and all of this stuff, they're going to go on to do this stuff to others. Like everybody just is ending up in this culture and making this wicked decisions together. It could be some surrounding peoples that were crying out to God about the wickedness. We know that Melchizedek and others were living in the land, those kinds of things. We've already seen that Sodom and Gomorrah, and this is something I wasn't really picking up on before, they were going to be carried off. They already had been carried off, Sodom had, by the kings of Assyria and Babylon. Just 13, 14 years earlier, Abraham had to step in and go and save Lot and his whole family in the city of all the people of Sodom. But really, we're going to see that again. The Israelites are going to be carried off into exile by Babylon and Assyria, the same two nations. And so it's almost like Sodom had this pre-warning that they were kind of on that way, trekking to exile. And you start to wonder, maybe it would have been better for them to just to have not been saved 14 years earlier and given that grace by Abraham of mercy, because now they're going to have utter destruction come on these two cities, basically not to be inhabited again. The place that they still think that Sodom and Gomorrah is uninhabitable today. And so again, we get this idea that maybe there's already been some warning signs that God has taken his hand of protection off of these two cities, that they would have been carried off to Assyria and Babylon if Abraham hadn't intervened. And now Abraham is going to intervene again and say, hey, can we talk about if there's any righteous people there? And again, God's going to make it kind of clear through this story that there aren't righteous people in these cities. And Abraham doesn't know that. So that's where we're starting. And so again, these angels, the two angels that are sent ahead, are basically going into the city to check it out, to see if it's really going as badly as everybody thinks it is. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord, right? We said the two men were the two angels. And then Abraham continues in this discussion with God. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Again, they're having this face-to-face, and we're getting some clarifying questions here. Suppose there were 50 righteous in the city. Would you also destroy the place if it had 50 that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So Abraham has this right. God is righteous, and he doesn't kill righteous people. He doesn't judge them. That wouldn't be right? And I think we all have that sense. It's not morally right to just take a group of 20 people and say, oh, someone was murdered in your in your community. All 20 of you now are going to die for that, right? We don't get that sense. But here, Abraham's kind of asking like numbers. We don't actually know how many people are in Sodom, but obviously more than 50. And that if there were 50 people, would that be enough for you to save the whole city? And would it be justice then if you destroyed the good people along with the bad people? Now, Abraham doesn't know how bad things are necessarily in Sodom. We don't really know. So then the Lord answers and assures him, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I'll spare all the place for their sake. Okay, this is a great point. God's like, no, I'm not going to take righteous people down with the wicked. That's not really justice. We don't get the entire story of how many or how this all works, but in general, he's saying, no, I wouldn't. And so we find out later that God is not just merciful, he's also loving, and love hopes. And if there's 50 righteous people in a city, that means there's possibly still a chance, right? Righteousness tends to spread. Like I said, generational learning patterns of toxicity spread, but also the righteousness and the ability of 50 righteous people to say, hey, not that. Let's get that healed up. Let's not do that the way, the people that raised you treated you. Like, let's take in some orphans. Let's do something different. So 50 righteous sounds like enough that they could even affect change, right? Like if we had that sense. Then Abraham answered and said, indeed Indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. So again, like I said, we're going to contrast this kind of Job. Abraham says, I'm just of dust. Like, who am I to even be talking to you right now? But I really want some further clarification. So he's kind of setting this up like, I'm not trying to sound presumptuous here, God. I'm not questioning your justice. But what would happen if, right? So he's going to set up this whole line of what if questions. And I'm not going to read these, like I said in the previous section. I'm going to skip some of these chunks just because there's a lot of reading here. He basically goes from 50 to 45 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10. And each time God says, no, if I find that many there, I'm not going to destroy it. Well, this is starting to really show God's gracious and merciful heart, right? And quite a few times, like Abraham is still interjecting every now and then, let not the Lord be angry and I will speak. He kind of keeps setting this up. I'm not trying to tell you that this is right or wrong, but I really am trying to gain understanding here. So we get this idea, and the conversation comes down to 10 righteous people. If there's 10 righteous people in a city, God's going to spare it. And now you get the sense like, okay, so that's enough? Like, that's enough people there? And it's like, no, really, God is coming to say, I'm going to weigh the city and I'm looking to see if it's wicked through and through, right? We see this even in the time of Noah. We really are only told that Noah was a righteous man, and he gets to take 7 people with him, and then nobody else is coming. A few other righteous people, his father, grandfather had already died, but there's nobody left on earth. So the destruction is fair and just as far as we understand, because the wickedness is just thoroughly wicked through everyone. And that's what's being weighed out here. And so this is where this part of the narrative ends, is we have 10 righteous people. If there's 10 righteous people, Sodom and Gomorrah will be fine. And so at this point, the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So the conversation's over. It sounds somewhat resolved. We're going to find out it's not really. There's not 10 righteous people in Sodom. And so again, now this becomes, what do you do if there's only 3 people in Sodom that need to be rescued? And their righteousness is kind of questionable. We find out later that it's only because of Abraham and the mercy of God that Lot and his 2 daughters are spared. But instead of finding 10 and sparing the city, we're just going to take what little's there out and then destroy everything. And so again, I'm sure the Lord knows this, but Abraham doesn't. So he's now in his place. He's staying there, and he's going to just see what unfolds. I doubt at this point he's expecting much to happen. The Lord says he'll return in a year and there'll be a child. So he has other things to tend to. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. So we're going to see the other half of the story. So while the Lord is with Abraham, we won't see the Lord reappear in the story again in interaction in the same way in a theophany. So from here on out, it's just going to be the 2 angels. So the 2 angels, and we're told right off, the 2 angels. They're 2 angels are going to Sodom. So this is very clear now. These were angels. They're messengers of God. They're not to be worshipped. They're just part of the accompaniment. They seem to have eaten and had their feet washed. So they've taken on, they're in some sort of physical form. They've been able to interact with Abraham and his wife. And sometimes we get this picture of little cherubim or angels with big wings. We get the sense they look like people. And we'll find out in the New Testament, Paul says that sometimes you entertain angels unknowingly. So that means they don't look funny. They look like people. So as they come into the city, Lot doesn't seem to recognize them as angels. The 2 angels came into Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Right? A gate sometimes was a place where they would do justice or business deals. So this is probably meaning he has some prestige in the city, some standing, right? He's sitting there at the gates, and Lot saw them. He rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground, and he said, "Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." So again, he's offering to wash their feet. He's going to take them into his house. This probably was in some of the that time period. It was somewhat custom to wash people's feet, give them some food, give them a place to sleep, and that way they would be safe when they came into a city or something. And so again, maybe there wasn't like the same hotel system we have today, right? It's just normal practices. So he sees 2 men. According to him, and the words he uses here is now my lords. That word my lords doesn't mean like gods, and that he's bowing in front of them isn't worship. It's just in respect. And so he's respectful that these are 2 visitors. He's willing to do what you should do to visitors. So he seems like he's doing what's right? He doesn't seem like he's gonna abuse them or hurt them or do any of the other things that we're gonna see come about in the story. He doesn't seem to be taking part, saying, hey, let's go out partying tonight or anything like that. He says, come back into my house, right? And the word here for my lords is like sir, like gentlemen, or, misters, like they're visitors to his city. So, and he bows in respect, but not in worship. They don't have to correct him. They know it's just a respectful bow. So again, like I said, this is just a very normal, customary thing. We're not getting the sense that Lot maybe understands that these are angels at this point, just in the way he addresses them as my lords or sirs. And it's very different than how Abraham had greeted. He goes running out there. He knows it's the Lord. He says, the Lord is here, right? And prepares them this huge feast and goes over the top. We don't see that quite from Lot. And they said, so the angels are going to reply, no, but we will spend the night in the open square. So I think they're probably testing Lot to see what's going to happen here. But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So he makes some bread. There's no cow. There's nothing extra here. No milk, no butter mentioned like Abraham had done for them earlier in the day. So it's still appropriate, though. They're entering his house and they're being taken care of. They'd offered to spend the night in the open square, right? They're on an investigation mission. If they're going to, they knew they weren't going to get hurt. They had all the power. We'll find that out, like of God behind them. And so here they're coming into his house. He's telling them, he strongly insists. So why is he strongly insisting they come into his house? Because he knows that the open square is a very dangerous place at night. He knows that is not good. So he's aware of the wickedness. And that's part of what I think we're finding from this story is this narrative is showing there's a lot of depravity in the city and a lot going on that shouldn't be, but Lot knows about it. And so we're just seeing as the narrator and the author brought all this together. That's the point they're bringing out. And so in verse 4, it says, now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. So this is not a good situation. And the point is kind of making that same sense that we see in the story of Noah. There was wickedness throughout all the people. Like this isn't 10 righteous and, there's not any of that going on. You get the sense that this is pretty much pervasive through young and old. It's not one generation or the younger generation. There's not a particular part. It's everybody. This is fully corrupted. Things are really, really bad here. Lot is correct in his assumptions. So Lot obviously knows this city pretty well. And this type of thing going on in their city, all of this is going to be covered later in the Levitical law and the New Testament. And so, again, this is not the way you treat visitors. This is not at all how you do these things. So as Lot is being hospitable and helpful, the rest of the city is not. And so we're starting to wonder, why is Lot here? So Lot went to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. So he recognizes this. He's making a judgment statement, right? He's been sitting at the gate. He probably has some standing in the city. And he's not scared, it doesn't seem. He's going out. He's going to go out. Lot is able to go outside with these men, and he tries to reason with wickedness. He's trying to reason with their lack of justice, the toxic city, the things that they're doing in this city. And he's now going to start negotiating with wickedness, which he's not going to be a good negotiator on behalf of the people he's supposed to be taking care of. He says, see, now I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. So he has 2 daughters that he is now going to offer. This is just an unthinkable bargaining tactic with wickedness, right? Him living here has led him into such deep compromise that he's now negotiating with wickedness and willing to commit sin and be this type of father to his daughters, to sell them, basically. We see the same kind of thing, Sarah and Abraham, she had been offered to Pharaoh for Abraham's sake. Like, these things aren't good. The narration is not saying all of these things. The narrator is not making a moral story out of this, right? But we get the general sense that this is not the way you do things. We're never told that it's morally right to offer the 2 daughters instead of the two angel men. Like this is not a good situation, and Lot is not taking this is not God's plan, right? We're not seeing that. This isn't somehow a good thing. And so the men of the city then say, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. So they're mad at Lot now for being a judge. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. So this whole crowd is going to crush him. And anything you know about crowds is mobs and crowds do crush people, like regularly when there's a lot of people. Even if they're not trying, they crush people. And so here, his life's in danger. Lot's being threatened, and they don't want him. They call him the very thing that he is, a judge, but they're being derogatory about it. He's judged this correctly as wickedness. And they don't want a judge, and they don't want justice in their city, and they don't want anybody speaking righteousness. They don't want anybody standing up for people that are getting hurt. They've made that very clear to the point that they're going to hurt him and kill him for it, right? Like they're pressing in on him. And so they're really showing themselves. So far, the angels haven't had to do anything but observe. This alone is showing how bad things are, and that Lot's been putting up with this. But the men reached out their hands, so the men being the angels, and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So the angels now have done this miracle. They've struck everybody with blindness. They've also opened the door, pulled out Lot, and basically everybody now is blind outside. So far, these two men have not been identified as angels, but now they should be, right? Lot should get this. The miracle of blindness should make it obvious, right? What Lot did not see at the very beginning, because he saw these men and met them as sirs or lords, he now is seeing them for who they really are, as emissaries of God and servants of God. And so they did this miracle. Now they're going to make some statements, and Lot needs to listen. He needs to not be difficult with them. He should know better. And then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Son-in-laws, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So they've just struck everybody with blindness, and now they're saying, we're here to destroy the place. Get out of here. And they're giving him some options. We don't get the sense he has any sons. All we find out about is he has daughters. And then it says his son-in-law, and we're not, at this point, we'll just hold off for a second. So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-law who had married his daughters, and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But his son-in-law, he seemed to be joking. So Lot saw this miracle of the blindness. He's taking them seriously. So he goes to this son-in-law. So you go, wait, the two daughters hadn't yet been with a man, but there was a son-in-law. So were they married or were they not? In the customs of the time, to be engaged meant you already entered into marriage covenant, but yet you hadn't come to the full marriage yet, right? Like in our day and age, we don't quite talk that way, but they were engaged. They were promised to this man. It says son-in-law. And so he's gone. So Lot is offering to his son-in-law, basically, come with us. You can come with us. And so again, his daughters, they'll still be promised to you. You can still be my family. And he goes, you know what? I don't believe you. And he should have, right? Because they were family at this point. He'd already entered into this marriage contract, and that he was going to marry his daughters. And this was already promised, and they were already supposed to be family. So this son-in-law is being treated like family. That's what covenants do, marriage covenants. It makes people family that aren't family, that weren't family before. And so he's being treated, the angels are treating him as though he's part of this. And so Lot can bring with him the people within this, but he wouldn't come. He thought that he was just joking, probably scoffing at the fact that it's going to happen. And so the son-in-law is going to die, from what we're going to find out. And when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry. So he doesn't take off right away, saying, arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered. Okay, so I'm going to just cut it there in verse 16 and just take a second. So Lot's seen the miracle of blindness. He's gone out and tried to convince his son-in-law. The angels are again in the morning. So they've waited overnight because it's probably not safe, although he has angelic escort that can make people blind. So again, it's morning. They haven't left yet. The angels are now pretty much ordering him, get out. We are going to destroy the city. Lot still does not want to leave the wicked city, right? While he lingered. So he is lingering after being told a very direct and clear thing. This is not a good place to be. When God sends messengers and messages, it's time to move on. Destruction's coming. Like in any other case, you would think Lot would have been destroyed in all of this, especially if Abraham hadn't already intervened and spoken to the Lord about it. His daughters almost were raped. He was almost attacked himself. His visitors are not safe there. Nothing under his care or protection is safe. And Lot still is lingering, right? There is no human reason outside he's going to lose everything, his home, everything. And so the men, these angels, took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So the angels have, between the two of them, 4 hands. So they can take each of one of 4 people in a hand and start dragging them out of the city. And so it doesn't sound like there's a lot of time to take belongings. It doesn't sound like they got to pack up much. They could have overnight, but they didn't. They weren't really ready. So they just get taken by the hands and out they go. The 2 angels are forceful in saving him and his daughters. The offer was for Lot, his wife, 2 daughters, his son-in-laws, so a total of like 5 people here would have been affected. And so it came to pass when they had brought them outside that he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest you be destroyed." So he's telling them the best place for you to is go to the mountain. You do not want to be here, and do not linger anymore. Escape. Do not look behind you. Basically, get your eyes on where you're going and get there. Like, this is not a time to stand and watch the destruction hit the city. That's not your job. Like, you're going to hear a lot of noise. There's going to be a lot going on. You don't need that. You don't need those visions in your eyes. You need to just look at the mountains and your safety and your refuge, right? That's usually what we're called to do. Keep our eyes on God and what he's provided. And so they're not to look behind, and they're to keep moving until they get to the mountains. Then Lot said to them, "Please no, lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's a little one. Please let me escape there, and my soul shall live." So Lot is begging. There's a little city nearby. Can I please go there? Like, you're saying you only want to destroy this city. Let me just go to the nearby city. I don't want to go to the mountains. I'm scared of the mountains. I'm afraid that some evil is going to happen up there and I'm going to die. So Lot's life is just driven by fear at this point. He really wants the safety of being in a city when exactly the opposite's true. It's the least safe place for him to be. He has bought into this whole idea. And we've seen that Abraham was out living in tents with his sheep. He's doing great. And even when that international war came, he's not carried off. But living in Sodom and Gomorrah has not proven well. And yet again, Lot is asking to be involved in city life. So he doesn't want to go to the mountains, and he asked to go to this nearby city. And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, that in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape, therefore. I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was Zoar. And we don't know if the city was up for destruction as well, but there's just kind of a blanket, okay, if you're going to go to that small city over there, that's fine. We're not going to destroy that one. So Lot would still have the ability to be in a city. Then the sun had risen on the earth when Lot entered Zoar. So he gets there. Great. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So this is an act of God. This is not, something bubbling up from the earth or something. This is fire and brimstone coming down from the sky on this place. And so he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. The whole place is burned up, destroyed. And again, as far as we know, it's still not inhabited today. So Lot goes over to the city of Zoar, Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed by an act of God. But in verse 26, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So she is looking back to this city. Kind of get the sense that she doesn't want to let go. She wants to see what's going on. Now, Lot and his 2 daughters don't, so it's very possible not to look back. But she does, and she dies. And so this is incredibly sobering, right? Lot's getting out with his 2 daughters. That's it. They're barely getting out alive. They've had to be dragged out by angels. Like, they've been given clear instructions how to continue this journey on their own. And they're to get to this city. And the destruction doesn't even start till they get to the city. So again, this is a mess in Lot's heart and life, right? That's been a long time. Okay, so now we're going to switch back to Abraham. And Abraham went out early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So Abraham went to bed that night. He'd had that discussion, if there's 10 righteous. And the next morning he gets up and the city is up in smoke. He doesn't know what's happened to his nephew and his nephew's family, right? His nephew's daughters and wife and all of that. He has no clue. All he knows is the very thing he didn't want to happen, which was the city or Lot getting destroyed with it, is happening. And so he's watching. And again, Lot's wife looks at the destruction and what's going on, and she dies, because it's kind of the sense that she's longing for it. Where with Abraham, he's looking and he doesn't get in trouble for that. So it's not looking at a city that's being destroyed as a problem. It's probably much more deep about somebody's heart posture and what that means to linger or still want to be somewhere. So his looking doesn't turn him to salt. He doesn't know if Lot is saved or not at this point, but he definitely knows at this point that there were not 10 righteous people. And so God says he remembered Abraham. So again, Lot is being saved, not because of Lot's righteousness or the things that are going well, right? Lot is negotiating with wickedness. He's living in the city. He knows how bad it is. He's willing to sell out his daughters. Like there's like things going on that's not just. He's not doing what's right. I wouldn't necessarily say that Lot's going to win any awards for being a righteous father, right? And so again, and his wife doesn't even make it out alive because she can't seem to. So we're not seeing that there was much righteousness involved, and God is just being flat out merciful, even removing them for Abraham's sake. And that's just kind of being stated here. And so we're going to go on just having a little bit more of the story here and the narrative of Lot and what happens after this. Again, this story is not going in the right direction already, and it's still going to not go in the right direction. So then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains. So wait a second. He just negotiated to live in Zoar, and now he's going to mountains where he didn't want to go in the first place. But he does, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. So he's even more scared of staying in Zoar than he is of going up on the mountain now. So he eventually gets to where he was instructed to go in the first place, which is up on a mountain. We're not sure why Lot was afraid of living in Zoar. It could have been many reasons, right? Maybe he saw wickedness there and thought, oh no, God's going to come destroy this place too. Maybe there were the same kind of stuff going on. Maybe he had PTSD from living in the city from the previous event and just wants to get away to a cave. Maybe he just wants to keep his daughters safe. We don't really get the sense, but he's scared. He's more scared of city life now than mountain life, and he's ready to go. Again, you have to remember, he probably already had some major issues and traumas in his life. They were carried off by the Babylonians and Assyrians already, possibly maybe before his daughters were born or when they were very young. In Sodom and Gomorrah, cities had been a really bad choice, and now Zoar probably is turning out to be not a great choice either. So we just see that there are some issues here. So he takes these daughters who are marriage age and wants to isolate them in the cave with himself. And so they are concerned about this. So the firstborn said to the younger, our father's old, and there's no man on earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. In other words, we want to have children. And it's not that they think they're alone in the world, like they're the only ones left that survive Sodom and Gomorrah. That's not at all what's happening. They know they aren't. They've been in the city of Zoar. They know there's people there, but for some reason their father has been ostracized or scared of everyone and isn't willing to put them into a marriage contract. And so the people of Zoar must not have been friendly. They must have really scared Lot somehow. And there were no new son-in-laws in the picture. And so again, the sisters are like, well, Dad's old and he's going to die in this cave and we're going to just kind of be left here. We need children to carry on. And so not a real good plan. Again, they had been raised in Sodom and they're making some really bad choices. So again, I'm not going to read this whole narrative. It's quite a chunk of verses between 32 and 35. But basically they get their father drunk and then they each take turns having him father a child with them. And so again, they want to preserve his lineage. And so he doesn't have any sons, it seems, at this point. And so they're doing this by having his children for him. Again, not a great plan. And so again, this has a lot of aspects of the same narrative right after the flood that Noah got into, right? He gets drunk, somebody sees him naked, or worse. Again, they're doing the same type of thing. This is, and the author, Moses, most likely centuries later, is partly bringing this story in to explain where the nations came from. And this is going to be the start of two nations, Moab and Ammon. And so Moses needs to explain, we have the Canaanites that came from Ham, that cursed line of Ham. Now we're going to have the Moabites and the Ammonites. And we see that that's what happened. Thus the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He fathered the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So we have the Ammonites and the Moabites. One daughter had one had the other, and they grew into these big people groups that stayed in the land and caused a lot of trouble. And so, again, as the Israelites are returning to the land, Moses is kind of giving them a history lesson. He's giving them some idea here of what has gone on. We know the Canaanites are a people that had a really bad start, and the Moabites and the Ammonites also were born out of these really horrific choices and these times of wickedness. And so, again, we see that these three people groups, then, this is why they're kind of given this role, then, as the rest of the Torah rolls out, of being these wicked people groups. And as that happens, then as the Israelites come back into the land, they're going to drive them out of the land, because they shouldn't be in a promised and a blessed land when they're not from a blessed line and they're not carrying it out, right? And we will find out in Deuteronomy that the Moabites and Ammonites, it's not that they came from the wrong line. It's not just physical inheritance. It's the whole spiritual inheritance has been bad. They will be considered foreigners, right? And so the Moabites would bring the worst carnal seduction of Israel at Baal Peor in Numbers 25. So the Moabites are not good for Israel. They cause huge problems. The Ammonites would bring the cruelest religious perversion of worshiping Molech in Leviticus 18:21. They'll be called out for that. So they are being set as standards in Moses' writings as really bad and wicked at his time. And then it's showing their origin story of where all this began. In Deuteronomy 23, the Moabites and the Ammonites will be excluded from the congregation of Israel. So you cannot be a Moabite or Ammonite and be part of the congregation. They would be considered foreigners. Now, foreigners could join the congregation if they converted to be Israelites, go through circumcision, go through denying all their foreign gods, only accepting the God Yahweh. We'll see this happen like with Ruth, the Moabite. She'll be a Moabite, but she commits to God to follow his ways, and she actually ends up in the lineage of Jesus. And so it's not that they couldn't repent and change, but they would have to change their nationality and change their identity from Moabite or Ammonite to do so. And so this is historically what Moses is saying here. These two nations had a really bad start, and let's not forget that. And that's part of the reason we're still having problems today, is that their hearts haven't changed. They haven't changed their ways, and they haven't come into covenant with God. And so this whole narrative now, we're starting to understand that God doesn't judge the wicked and the righteous together. He even takes people that we probably wouldn't consider righteous out of the situation on the sake of someone else, right? A Lot's removed because of Abraham, and that God is gracious and merciful as he can, but ultimately the judgment does come. They're not just carried off to Assyria and Babylon. These two cities are thoroughly destroyed, and pretty much for all time, as we see it. So that's really where we're going to close. The promise is still hanging that Isaac will be here within a year, right, in the story. And that's really, as we move forward, that's the part of the narrative we'll be picking up.